Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and I made a bear with a gun. Why? I don't know. Why not? Of course, the ever-important first step to making a bear is making some bare bones and a base to build those bare bones on top of. This little base is so my bear can be striking an appropriately heroic pose, which means I need to bend the knee to appropriate said pose. However, before I pop the posed piece in place, I'll cover the bare wood bear base in some aluminium tape. I've started using this stuff to cover all my bases since it keeps the cured clay from adhering to the base, meaning I can peel it off much more easily later. With my bones based and appropriately posed, I can start the aluminiumizing of my bare bones to thicken them up. This guy is going to be a pretty big boy, so to cut back on the potentially staggering amount of clay, I'm going to thicken up his bones a fair amount before I move on to the enclaying process. At this stage, all I'm focused on is getting clay onto the foil and building out a very rough shape. Once I've got enough of the body built up and I've slapped a temporary head in place, I'll do some quick limb delineation, marking out the bear's bare groin zone and thickening up the necessary lumpy leg bits. I can then stick a couple oversized gray clay sausages onto the sides to act as arms. A little bending and posing will get them bent into the correct pose, and I can make his big bear pecs and give him a big bear belly before moving on to making his big bear face. At this point, this will be the third bear I've made on this channel, and, well, the third bear I've made since I'm not in the habit of making bears in my spare time, and I feel confident saying that I don't understand how bear faces work. Apologies to any bears who might be watching this video, but bears have super weird heads. I think it's maybe because there's so much fur that what would be a normal-sized face seems to get lost in all that fluff. It kinda looks like if you took a human face and resized it so it was just a tiny bit too small for the head. Also, what's going on with bear lips? I don't like them. All this to say that while trying to make a bear face look right, it ended up looking wrong because I think it's supposed to look wrong, and if it looks right, then you've done it wrong. I ended up adding some temporary placeholder ears in the hope that it would make this whole ordeal a little bit more bearable, but at this point I'm gonna move on to something else since in reality it took me right up until the last minute before baking to settle on a shape that I think is at least somewhat bear accurate. To make his bare feet, I'll stick some big flat lumps of clay onto the tips of his legs and blend them in before cutting a set of toes into the tips. Then these get shaped and rounded to be a little less blocky before moving on to doing the same thing for his bare hands. I'll start with 4 bare fingers on the hands, rounded and shaped into stumpy bare fingers before adding that ever-important bare thumb. Now, I can already see the comments informing me that bears don't have thumbs. These are my hands, and as you can see, I'm wearing gloves on them. However, these are my bare hands, and as you can clearly see, my bare hands have thumbs. Therefore, my bear's hands must have thumbs as well.
It's science.
The thumbs, of course, are particularly important since they were going to be what allowed my bear to hold his guns. Now, I say guns plural because I was originally envisioning my bear holding an M60 in each hand like an extra hairy Rambo. However, after some initial sketching, I realized that making the machine guns to match the size of his hands would make them a bit too unwieldy. So at this point, I'll pivot to the Terminator minigun you saw in the thumbnail. Fortunately, I haven't baked anything at this point, so it's easy enough to elongate the right arm and twist the left arm to accommodate the switch grip for a future minigun. A quick turn of the neck and a twist of the head will align my yelly face with whatever he's yelling at off to the side, and I can get started adding the final finer details. I'll start by adding the padding to the palms and fingers before working my way across each of the fingers and toes, poking great big divots into the tips so that I can add some pre-baked claws into each. I'll then return to the head in the vain hope of making it finally look right by adding lots of little wrinkles along the nose and replacing the ears with ears that are actually in the correct spot. As I said before, bear mouths are unsettlingly close to xenomorph mouths since their lips kind of do their own thing irrespective of what shape the rest of the mouth is making. To that end, I've curved the lips into a weird floppy shape and built the gums almost entirely separately. I'll then add his molars to the back of his mouth before taking some teeny tiny claws and jamming those into the front of his mouth where they will be his teeth. Finally, I can fit a pre-flattened tongue in place, and after a bit of repositioning, I'm finally ready for the much feared inferring process. Now, I try to make a new video each week, and with a couple days set aside for editing, I don't generally have a great deal of time to mess about with the sculpting, which means I need to figure out a way to cut corners while maintaining a certain degree of not looking like utter garbage. Now, there's a lot of ways to make really terrific looking authentic sculpted fur, but they all have one thing in common: god damn it, they're time consuming. With that in mind though, I'm pretty excited to show you my 3-step fur making system that I'm kinda making up on the spot and will very likely involve more than 3 steps. Step 1 is using the flat edge of a piece of dowel to roll some semi-random parentheses-shaped cuts into the entirety of the soon-to-be fluffy furred surface. Step 2 is using a copious amount of alcohol on a soft brush to blend away the choppy marks left by the dowel since you happen to have grabbed the wonkiest piece of dowel in the drawer. Step 2.5 is using a ball stylus to add some oversized texture to each of the lumps, maintaining their individuality while adding that initial layer of furry texture. Step 2.5a is using a slightly stiffer brush with, again, a copious amount of alcohol to begin blending all those lumps into one another to smooth away some of the sharper lines as well as impart a tiny bit of texture from the brush strokes. Step 2.5a Addendum 1a is using a much stiffer brush with a touch less alcohol to add some deeper brush strokes to each of the lumpy furry bits. Finally, step 3 is adding the last of the fur to wherever you didn't want the big clumpy bits of fur to be. And with that, all that's left to do is stick a little tail in place, and that's my patent pending 3-step inferring process finished, and I can confidently say that this is the best fur I've ever made. Finally, to finish it all off, since this is a gun-toting battle bear after all, I figured he could do with a little battle damage, so I'll give him some little scars scattered around his body by cutting into the furry bits, leaving some little overhanging tufts of fur to show that the surrounding hair's grown back nicely. I also fixed his face one final time, but that's my bear finally finished and ready for a bake and some paint. I'll start with a dark brown base coat to set the initial dark brown coloring, which I guess is exactly what a base coat is for, before giving the hands and feet a light misting with black and the chest and mutton chops a light beigey coloring for extra color, I guess. Once that's dried, I'll then aggressively dry brush the entire surface with a series of progressively lighter browns to really highlight all the individual brush stroke furs from step 2.5a Addendum 1a. I'll then paint his nose, toes, fingers, and pads with a flat black. I can then give his scars and mouthy bits a base coat of terracotta, followed by a couple coats of lighter pinks and purples. Finally, his teeth get a base coat of bone white, followed by a glazing with pure white to create a lovely toothy gradient, and I can paint his eyes with a pure midnight black. And apart from a bit of gloss varnish to make various bits a bit more slobbery, that's my battle bear finally finished, which means it's time to make him a gun. And because it's a minigun, I'm gonna need like 6 barrels and a bunch of those disc things that go between the barrels to space them out. I'll first drill the tips of the barrels to hollow them out so they're not flat on the end, then I can mark out 6 kinda but not quite evenly spaced spaces on one of the discs. I'll then drill the holes out, leaving me with 6 kinda wonkily spaced holes, which I can then use as a top plate template to make sure the rest of the discs at least somewhat line up with one another. I also made a single hole in the middle so the minigun has something to spin on, then it's just a case of sliding each of my drilled barrels into the matching set of holes. Then once I've got my discs spaced out in an aesthetically pleasing manner, I can press the barrel into a slightly larger clay disc. To make the body of the minigun, I've cut a cardboard tube to size that I'll fill with some pre-loved aluminium foil to help it keep its shape before capping the ends and wrapping the exterior in some more clay. Once that's been smoothed flat, I'll cap one end with a slightly smaller disc and chamfer the edges before adding another disc so that I can drill a little hole into the middle of it and attach a length of armature wire for a trigger, as well as attach another bit of bent wire for the handle on top. I'll then wrap both of these bits of wire with some clay and shape said clay into a slightly more appropriate shape. The trigger I'll make look like a trigger, and the handle I'll make look like a handle. Finally, it's just a case of adding various bits and bobs to the outside of the body to make it look a little bit more interesting. I don't know what purpose any of these bits serve, but they add a bit of flair to an otherwise boring round tube. I'll then pop some pipes in place at the back near the handle, and I can glue the 2 parts together. Then after a quick test run, I think I can say this minigun is done. Of course, it's not going to be much good if our battle bear doesn't have any ammo, and because it's a minigun, he's going to need a whole bunch of ammo, so I'll make a big ammo box from this block of wood, and to carry said box, I'll make him a little metal backpack from this piece of wire. Using the wooden block as a reference, I can bend the wire into a frame that will fit the box, then I can fill in the back with some little lengths of stir sticks cut to size, held in place with some super glue, and covered in painter's tape. With my backpack frame finished, I decided my ammo box was a bit too small, so I'm going to add a bit of thickness by gluing a sheet of MDF to the block. Additionally, because I want this to be smooth, I'll coat the entire box in a thick layer of PVA glue. And once that's had a chance to dry and the PVA is cured, I can sand it smooth. This will leave me with some nice flat surfaces that should hide any of the wood grain beneath. I'll fancy the box up a little bit by adding some little strips of cardboard around the rim and down the middle, as well as adding a little lash to the side. Finally, I'll fill in any of the gaps with gap filler, and that's my little ammo box done, which means it's time to make the ammo. Now, figuring out the best way to make this ammo belt ended up taking almost as long as making all the other components put together. Eventually, I realized that this isn't going to be the thing that everyone pays attention to, and spending any more time fussing over it was going to be a substantial waste of time. In the end, the quickest and easiest method that looked good enough was to cut a strip of black XPS foam into little rectangles and hold them all together with a couple strips of painter's tape. I put the painter's tape on the table face up with 2 strips sitting parallel to one another, then I slowly added each of my rectangles evenly spaced out. Then I taped another couple strips of tape on top, and this left me with an ammo belt that's flexible enough to move as I need it to, but rigid enough to keep its shape when I've set it in place. And with that, the assembly is done, so it's on to the painting. Because there are a bunch of different materials being used, I'm going to prime everything with a coat of black primer. And while I was at it, I also primed a set of 4 long elastic bands that I'm going to use as the straps. I'll paint the minigun's barrels with a coat of gunmetal gray, which seemed appropriate, as well as touch up a couple of the greeblies I attached to the body. To add a touch of color, I'll paint the gas cylinder thing on the side with a vibrant red, the handle with a leathery brown, and the tubes on the back get a very light gray. I'll then dust the barrels with some silver dry brushing and add lots of scratched paint chips to all the black spots by sponging on some silver. A little final detailing of the silver with a brush, and once it's all dried, I can give the barrels a coat of black wash and everything else a muddy brown wash. The backpack frame I'll paint with a dark aluminium and edge highlight with some silver, and then I'll paint the ammo box with a couple coats of army green until I've got a nice solid base coat. To make it look a little bit dirtier, I'll coat it in a layer of black wash, then I can wipe it away as it's starting to dry, which will leave me with some intentionally ugly streaks and stains. Then, same as I did with the minigun, I'll sponge lots of little flecks of silver onto the edges and around the front and the handle. I then made a little square stencil from painter's tape that I used to paint a perfect little orange diamond with a tiny black border. I don't know what this symbol means, but it seems to be on all the ammo boxes I looked up on Google, and it helps to fill in an otherwise boring green box. Finally, using my fine stenciling brushes, I'll paint a bunch of ammo-appropriate things onto the box. I figured 2,000 cartridges is probably enough for a few seconds on full auto, and I'm pretty sure a minigun would use 7.62mm rounds. Finally, I'll add a lot number on the bottom, and if you know what significance lot 1407220 has to this channel, leave me a comment down below. The first 100 people to get it right will be the first 100 people who got it correct. Last but not least, I'll paint the ammo belt with a gunmetal gray, and I can paint my elastic band straps with a leather brown base coat and some lighter khaki colored edge highlighting. Because the elastic band is obviously more flexible than the acrylic paint, once the paint's dried, it cracks beautifully, creating a very cool looking worn leather appearance. All I need to do then is start assembling my pieces. The backpack will get a little dollop of glue to hold it in place, and I can start to attach the straps. I'll snip the elastic bands in half, and using some thin CA glue, I'll wrap one end around the metal frame, then loop it around the bear's belly, and attach it to the other side. I'll then repeat this process with the straps that go over the shoulders, attaching both of them to the belt in front. Finally, I'll attach a couple straps across the backpack itself, leaving just enough room to slide my ammo box down and in so it's secured snugly between the straps. The minigun then gets glued into the bear's anxiously waiting hands, and I can glue one end of the ammo belt onto the body of the minigun and run it down and up into the bottom of the ammo box. Then a little pinching and rearranging will make it hang a bit more naturally. I'll also take a minute to give the ammo belt a wash since I forgot to do that earlier, then I can add some final little metal bolts to the straps. Otherwise, that's Bartholomew the Battle Bear finally finished. However, he does need something to stand on, so it's time to make a tactical rock. To make said tactical rock, I'll start with a piece of foam that's roughly the same thickness as the wooden block Bart's standing on and hack at it until it kinda looks like a rock. Of course, said rock needs a rocky texture, which means it's time for rocks. And with a little gentle persuasion, my rock is now looking rocky and ready for some paint. This white base coat will be the perfect base to give my rock a nice rocky wash. I'll start by slapping some grays and browns and yellows and greens onto my rock, then mixing it all together to create a natural looking rocky color. Of course, I can't leave well enough alone, so I ended up poking at it while it was drying and making an unsightly gray center, so instead of starting over, I'll just wash the rock again with a unifying blackish-brownish wash. Once that's had ample time to dry, I can then highlight the edges by working my way through some dry brushings, starting with a sandy beige, a bone white, and a final pure white. Finally, with my rock fully cured, I can fit the Battle Bear onto his mighty tactical rock, and that's us done here and onto the GlamourShots. As always, a massive thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon who continue to support this channel, and a very special hey how are you to my newest patrons, Caitlin Scully, Ruthless Cutie, Hazel Tomato Basil, Cats with Party Hats, Benzine, Jessica Austin, Laura, Nathan Loves You 69, Monkey Loves a Bunny Forever, Bacon Lamb, Anna Steffi, Locasta, Midnight Pierogi, Benyon, Username Denied 7, Josue Not Jose, Nixie Aiden Harper, Nicolas, Dre Drax, John English, Mise Art, Shopshashkovet, Louis Crosley, Builder GW, Riley Bean, Leo Mommy and Daddy, Nicole's Candles, Draven Van Heel, Barrett Holland, Jill Lebert, Sasha Frank, Tori, Look Han I Did It, Moon Sue, Your Mother's Favorite Gynecologist, Jam Cat, The Baby Ghoul, Sheba Hill Tabidley, Faith Tisby, Sarah Gallagher, Truffle Hunter, Titano Boa Hunter, Wixie Danger, You Left a Fingerprint on the Cupid's Back, Meet the Muggers, Mark H, and Snarf, 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 Snarf. You are the battered and bruised ammo box that keeps this minigun of a channel firing full auto. So far, we've got a T-Rex with a flamethrower and a bear with a minigun. So if you've made it this far, then let me know down below what you think should come next. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.